Welcome to BizTech Forward, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights at the intersection of business and technology. Let's move forward together. Hello, welcome back to Season 2 and the new episode of BizTech Forward. I'm Anni, your host, and today's episode is all about clients, specifically client expectations from IT vendors. What did clients want from vendors 10 years ago? What do they expect now? To discuss all of that, I'm joined by Mike Peterson, advisory CTO, CIO, mentor, and coach. Mike is a seasoned technology executive and advisor with over 30 years of experience leading large tech companies through transformation. What sets him apart is his unique experience as an executive on both the buy side and sell side of consulting and product companies. This dual perspective gives him a deep understanding of how businesses evaluate, implement, and derive value from technology solutions. So, Mike, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to talk with you.
As I am to share what I know.
Okay, then let's jump right in. Mike, as I mentioned, you have loads of experience and you've been on both sides of the table, the client side, the vendor side. So my first question to you is, what do you think is the biggest change in what clients expect from IT vendors today compared to, say, 10 years ago?
I think the fundamentals are still the same. When you get an outsourced vendor, you want them to bring the best tech talent that they can bring and people who have domain knowledge. I think they look for a value, and sometimes that's a cost value, but really value is determined by cost plus skills. The best skills for the best cost is what you always look for. And you want folks that are good at communicating. So communication is really important. The things that have changed is I think clients are more inclined to a hybrid team. I would say 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was really about staff aug. I mean, there were certain groups, big vendors that would come in and do project-based stuff, but the majority of it was just staff augmentation. And that word describes the whole thing. You probably wanted one or two resources that you could bring in. You weren't doing large scale staffing from somebody. But that's changed, and that's changed for a couple of reasons. One, the cost of FTEs has gone up like 10% year over year, and the equipment to support them has come up year over year. And so I think, it's harder to get rid of, it's a bad thing to say, but it's harder to trim the staff down of FTEs. At least with outsourced vendors, you have a shorter pass. So you can, staff up and staff down for projects a lot easier. I also think that remote teams, and particularly after the pandemic, people are far more accepting of remote teams, which has led to another phenomena. And that is 10 or 15 years ago, there are probably 2 or 3 or 4 places you'd look for offshore or nearshore. They were India, they were EU, Ireland, particularly China in some cases. And, I know we sourced, because in one company I was with was a networking company. We sourced a lot from Israel and Germany. But, with the pandemic, if you looked at the staff that I put together or you guys put together for me at CFA, we had people in 20 different countries. And that's remarkable. And it says two things. It says that people are starting to understand that good tech talent is everywhere. Every country has got into this, and people are willing to be that. And people who are on the buy side are excited about having, that mixed cultures come in and add additional things to the project. But that's certainly something that has happened. I think those are the big things.
Right. Was it strange at first to kind of adjust to that, having people in 20 different countries work for you, when we first started?
I think that the difficulty in all this And I know we're going to talk about this in the next segment, but I think that what is hard to adjust is when you're primarily an FTE organization, it's a lot easier to create rapport and relationships with people you see every day and see in person, and you get to know them. And, it's in today's world, the first time you meet people, sometimes it's a surprise. I remember when I started as CFA, it was right during the pandemic, and we decided to go all remote, even for employees. And so I worked with this one guy on the business side a lot. And, I always pictured him as being really tall because he had this long torso and he'd sit and he looked tall. When I met him, he was like 5'5", and I was a little surprised. So you always have these surprises when you meet somebody in person. But there's also, that nuanced stuff that when you're in the room with somebody, there are body language cues, there are other cues that are going on. You can see the, inner relationship between people, and people are generally paying attention, with, everything being video, you can't tell who's really paying attention or wearing pants, so.
Yeah, it's a good bridge to where I wanted to ask next. Actually, I asked you, what has changed, but I also wonder, is there anything that clients miss from the good old days? Maybe things that were simpler or handled differently, or is it even appropriate to ask? So what would you say? Anything clients?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's something to be aware of because there's a good possibility that a lot of people are going to be forced back into the office. Because I think one of the things that people miss is they miss that. Well, there are two issues. One is I think they miss that human connection of having, a lot of FTEs, which I don't think we'll ever go back to that. But, every board and it always asks, why do we have so many, outsourced resources? But then when you go through the financials and you explain, your ability to staff up and staff down based on the pace of projects, they usually back off, but then they always come back to it because they see it as sort of a risk. So one of the things is, de-risking as far as domain knowledge and intellectual property and having, more employees. And I think people miss that. And you find a lot of people who have been around for a while still push really hard to have, a larger in-house staff. I think something else they miss is the slower pace of change. I mean, change just sort of accelerates and builds on itself because the fundamentals have stayed the same. But if you look at the things that are different now than it was 10 or 15 years ago, it's miraculous. I mean, we didn't have the cloud. We primarily were using relational databases. We weren't using large volumes of data. We didn't have, a lot of this technology that, SaaS technology. We didn't have, easy to use self-serve like analytics and BI tools. And I think the change is overwhelming at times. And, whether it's the executives or the people who are in the staff, not everybody loves change and chaos. I mean, I love that, right? I mean, that's what I find exciting about the field. Before I get bored, something changes. And there are also some just sort of simple practical things like how do executives and a lot of people understand just the whole move to data and analytics. It used to be we were well founded in decision science, and decision science is just like, a spreadsheet. It's very factual. You can get 100% answer. But when you moved into the type of analytics that we use, and now with AI, everything's probabilistic math. And, you're trying to get closer and closer to accuracy. And sometimes being 80% true, which I'm certain half executives don't understand that even if they took statistics in college, they don't get that you can only get so accurate and you're spending money and there's constant spend to get closer to 100%, but you probably never reach there. I mean, why we have hallucinations in AI? Because it's predicting what the answer is or stringing together things for an answer as is sort of most likely, but it's not 100%. And the other thing is just the pace of change as far as compute power and infrastructure. There's just the other thing that's changed is it used to be the technologists guided the company to strategic decisions, and more that's being driven by executives, leadership teams and boards because they hear a competitor is AI is a great example of this, or what we were doing in the cloud. That was coming from outside. It didn't really look and say, gee, what is the business and how much am I going to spend on it and what's it going to do? So I think people miss in the technology departments being able to be more influential in the change. They may fool themselves that they are, but if you look around and you see that most requests for different types of change, it's coming from people who aren't technologists in leadership and who don't really understand or can separate the hype from where technology really is. And I think thirdly, the new thing that I see that I think people miss in the technology group is that now anybody can go to ChatGPT and come into a meeting sounding like an expert because they've gone in, that's where they've gotten their answers, and they don't really know what the nuances of what they're talking about. They just get a good answer from ChatGPT and it makes them look smarter.
But you can always tell, right?
Yeah, but you can't challenge some of these people, right? I mean, that's one of when a board member or a senior executive comes in and they think they know more than you do because they look something up on Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, and they're trying to sound smart, and it's hard to challenge them.
Mike, you did mention data briefly, and I wanted to ask you to talk a bit more about this, actually, just to understand how does data factor into all of this? Like, data isn't just about tech these days. I thought it was about making decisions much faster. Is that so?
Well, I think that data, we are in the era of data, even if they want to call it AI. I mean, the foundation of AI is data. It was probably 10 to 15 years ago when we started to move into big data and really get into data science and really get into machine learning, that data became more imperative and more important. And the more data you had and the ability to process it. So along the way, the infrastructures got better, right? Compute power went from CPUs to GPUs. And so instead of doing really fast and using Moore's law to get more serial processing done, you went to GPUs and you were getting parallel processing done. So the amount of things that you could do, and this has been the great push, and you see this with things like, NVIDIA being so popular. I mean, those chips were originally for gaming. So in gaming, you had to be able to process in parallel. And somebody figured out, gee, there's other things that we can do related to data and crunching numbers and doing the type of analytics that we want to do. So that infrastructure, we moved out of data centers and into the cloud. So cloud storage allowed you to have a lot more data. You started thinking, not in kilobytes or, megabytes. You would start thinking in terabytes and petabytes. You had so much data at your ready and what you could do. And, all the techniques that came for cleansing that data and organizing it and be able to access it. So we are in the age of data. Now that's just the underpinning for why we can do large language models, and why we can do the type of, AI that we're doing and what we're going to do. And God help us if they figured out how to do quantum computing when you'll be able to do, 1 billion calculations at once. So the other thing that data has spawned is a whole new realm of cybersecurity, both on the protection side and the attack side. And so we have to be able to do that of laws around the world. Everybody has a privacy law. In China, they got PIPL, we got GDPR, and US. I mean, even California has a variation of the privacy law that's different than the rest of the US. India has for years threatened to put something out, but I think they waited for the last election and that'll restart. And so when you have these sovereign data rules and privacy, you have to think differently about how you architect things and how you have local data and what you have to do to be able to process in there, and that's process the data as well as manage the data. And so we are dead in the center of the data revolution, and we're neither at the beginning or the end, but this is only going to, with the technology that's coming underneath, it's only going to become more. And then you wrap around that, the desire for privacy and the desire for sovereign countries to have their own sovereign clouds, their sovereign rules, and you have to be able to, figure that. I mean, China has the Great Firewall. The amount of impediments that puts in outside people and gives an advantage to internal companies. I mean, you see this with lawsuits against Google and search and stuff from the EU. It is all about data.
Sure. You mentioned privacy and security, and it makes me think of another word. It makes me think of responsibility. So I want to ask you two questions about responsibility. Please bear with me as I formulate my questions, but you often hear you cannot outsource your core strengths. But what exactly are a company's core strengths actually today? Like for a retail company, for instance, a hospital chain, a financial firm, when so much is now increasingly depending on technology?
It's domain knowledge. And we'll talk about domain knowledge, because it's one of the things, one of the new expectations of your partners is that they walk in and they understand your business. One of the things that's unique to being a technologist today versus being in the business is we not only have to understand all the technology, but we have to understand how to apply that to the business domain that we're in. So the secret sauce that companies have is often the domain knowledge, how they apply a solution into the business domain that they're in. And that's what makes them unique. And that's what they, do that. So, this is the unique things. I mean, you take CFA as an example. They're very good at, this credentialing and education of people who want to get the credibility of managing high wealth individuals and assets for those people. That's a very narrow domain knowledge that you really have to understand the nuances in order to provide the proper technology and apply it where it needs to go. So responsibility within a company is then protecting, that domain that you have, specific data to that gives you your advantage, but also your customers and clients. What kind of stuff do you collect from them? What do you process from them? And how are you responsible about how you protect that, how you use that, how you share that, how you anonymize that? So that is an absolute key thing within the realm of data in today's business.
Right. Mike, and can a company outsource responsibility? Like, in other words, can clients of today really hold their vendors accountable for results and then sleep well at night, not worried about program management? Or is it never that simple because vendors rely on clients for money, clients find it too expensive to switch vendors? And so does this create a situation when neither side can push too hard?
Well, I think then it talks about the leadership in a company, because that comes down to trust. And therein is the crux of any relationship. It's the trust. And I think a lot of that has grown with having distributed teams and hybrid teams and using, video as a way to do work, is because you have to trust, people you don't really have that personal connection to. And some people, and this is why you're going to see a lot of people being pushed back into the office, because the way these pendulums swing, and you could take anything in society or technology, and there's a pendulum that swings. It says, I'm going to go this and I'm going to go so far. There's going to be something happens. It may be an anomaly. There may be two of those, and it's going to scare me. And I'm going to come back the other way and over things and, overprotect. And then I'm going to realize I can't move as fast as I want to. I can't be as dynamic as I want to. So you got to find that balance in that trust. And part of the way that a consulting firm imparts trust is the way that they communicate, the way that they report against KPIs. Again, understanding the domain. So if you're sitting in a QBR, you're sitting in something like that, you can express results, you can express issues in a way that's the language they have, and understanding it and relating it, in a story or in a presentation to the executives, to have them trust that you know what you're doing and they impart that on you. I mean, every day in our lives, we trust policemen, we trust the guy who picks up the garbage. There's plenty of activities that go on in our lives that we have to trust those people, and repeated success and seeing the results of that is what allows us to have that trust.
That's so interesting. You linked it back to the fundamentals that you mentioned at the very start. So trust and communication, just like it is
It's
personal
common
lives,
sense. It's real life. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that we miss a lot of times is I have these personal 3 C's: communication, culture, and common sense. And common sense, I think, is the one thing that people don't rely on that they should have the most of. Because, this is like working with hybrid teams. Everything is about human nature and how we work with them and how we apply technology, because we have to apply it and in the end to, working with our customers, whether that's our customers, the company, or the company's customers, or an individual or other companies. And it has to have that type of relationship.
I wanted to ask you, like, from the vendor side, hey, so things are changing so much. You mentioned yourself that it sometimes feels like too much change for many clients. So change is all we got. Technology is going like a crazy speed. And I wanted to ask, so how do vendors actually stay relevant without constantly playing catch up? Or how can they meet all these client expectations?
Well, I think they have to understand the reality and not the hype. And I think almost every company, and we'll use a bell curve. I'm a strong believer in the bell curve. And if you look at any IT shop or any company, they're probably going to be doing 10 to 20% on future things. So if they're talking a lot about AI and they have this big AI movement, it's not 100% thing. There's a small number of people who actually, unless they're like OpenAI, but, the standard company that's trying to apply, generative AI or machine learning, it's a small percentage of people who are actually endeavoring to do that. And so let's say that's 10 to 20%, which is still a lot of change within a company. Now, probably 60% or more is dedicated to the completion of big digital transformations they're doing, or implementing a new SaaS platform, or things that support the core business that they have and trying to modernize in that sense. And that's meat and potatoes stuff for most technology companies. And then I think there's another 10 or 20%. It's just, watching over the old stuff that's still necessary, but hasn't put on the slate for change. So, if you look at a strategic pillars that most companies they have, they're somewhere in that bell curve percentage, because that's logical. You can't take on too much change because it's too disruptive to your business. And most change is there to advance your business in the future. Even when you do projections on revenue, you're trying to do it in a way that you can't implement something if you're on a calendar year. if you implement something and it's high on your strategy list and you implement it in July or August, it's going to have relatively minimal impact to your revenue that year. So you have to know when that's applied and how it thinks. Again, just common sense, because we as human beings are the same way. If we're going to renovate a piece of our house, we're not going to necessarily do a tear down because we'd have to find somewhere to live, so it's pretty pragmatic. And so as a company like DataArt, you need to come up with your set of formula that helps you deal with that. How many people do you have dedicated or learned are in the upskilling process that matches that transition from new effort to becoming more common, in the bell curve? What are the skill sets that match up to that? If you look at any project, most projects today, the majority of staff is a programmer or a tester. And then there's different unique skill sets, an architect or somebody who is a specialist in something, somebody like from one of your labs. That's a smaller percentage than, the number of people that any company would want, because they're expecting the same thing. Generally, they're going to need to staff up on a project around those most common, skills. But there will be times when they come and say, help us with this new stuff we want to do, because nobody's really skilled in that now. Some people might be a little bit more advanced because, they've done the college degree, and they might have been in an adjacent thing like natural language processing or something like that. So I think that's, part of the way you have to think about it. That's just sort of how I believe about this.
Yes, I got it. It's interesting. You gave a very specific kind of direction and depth for vendors to think about. And I want to ask you about the future a little bit. You did mention twice or a couple times that we might all be forced to go back to the office. But other than that, I wonder, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen, Mike, generally? But more specifically, what do you think clients will expect from IT vendors in the next couple of years?
I think the biggest expectation is that if you look at the amount of money that's pursuing AI, and they look at the number of companies that are trying to implement it, and again, back to the hype cycle, they're way ahead of their skis, as they say. But what they expect, and the quantifiable things that the board is looking for more than anything else is, what are the efficiency gains and cost reductions, quote unquote, that are going to be driven from AI. Now, from the business of DataArt, that means that I got to have people skilled up on the AI augmentation tools like Copilots and Q and things that, help stave off, 10 or 15%, in my development time, my test time, my creation of test cases, and that, rolls down into monitoring and security tools and the type of things that are real and can be leveraged and can be used and provide value. Yeah, I remember sitting in a meeting and someone saying, well, we're going to need to get a whole bunch of data scientists. And I'm like, well, I don't think so. I think mainly what you need are data engineers, and you need these type of skills. And that's another one. I mean, data engineering is a massive need out there, and will be for, the coming, 5 to 10 years. And you just have to be, again, this is common sense. If you look at any technology that's been implemented and new, going back from, I've been through, 20 of these different large scale changes. I remember when my first job, we were going from programming that was cards and mainframes to a single line editor and then a full page line editor. And we were trying to transition all the code off the card into those editors, which were very clunky. But there's been 1,000 of those changes that have, made the mundane things more efficient. And that's what these co-pilots and coding tools and testing tools do, is they can make the mundane things more efficient, but there's always a human in the loop. And it's not that it's not you're getting rid of staff. You have to have a newly skilled staff that's going to replace them. And they're still going to have to be involved. They're just going to have different tools to use.
So knowledge, efficiency, common sense is what clients, will always expect.
And it's easy to follow and to predict, because just watch where the money's going. If if you're sitting, you watch, something like Bloomberg, or you watch, something like Squawk Box, you can see who's investing in what, and you can see where the VCs are putting their money. And you can see, it's hard to determine who's going to win, but where they're spending, and typically, where that's going to push businesses, because investors aren't stupid. They're going to put their money where they have the best bet that they can do.
Right. Mike, I now want to ask you my last question for today, but also my favorite question I like to ask our guests. And it is, do you have any unpopular opinions on this whole topic? One or two.
I think again, I'll go back to trying to be sensible, trying to be level-headed, and not get caught up in all the hype and the BS. You want to put yourself and position yourself. I've seen a billion people get left behind by not looking in where change is going. I've saw a lot of people fail because they overcommitted to change. And so you have to know what that balance is to upskilling. Where do you upskill? How do you get there? So I think the all-in rush, ignore things because this is the new end-all, be-all, and AI is that today. And it's certainly going to be in a lot of places. But you got to do it with, measured steps and logical steps. It's not, there's no miracle here in learning how to do these things. And I think people who talk about how easy it is and, what you can do with it, and that's coupled with my whole pet peeve about everybody coming in to sound smart after they've gone on to, ChatGPT or something and got a bunch of information and then, spout like they know what they're talking about, and you got to be aware of that, and you've got to be able to learn how to deal with that. And then, present a case or a story that talks about, here's what we really have to do. Sometimes in the early hype cycle, it's hard to do because people are so passionate about that change. But I think you're already seeing disillusionment in the money that people have spent. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a CIO, and they bought an AI company. And, and he said that right now they're getting ready to get acquired by, a big, set of investors. And their whole push is for AI. And they had bought this AI company. And, and I said, well, at least you have that segment. He said, yeah, but we can't, we're having trouble to get people to pay what we want them to pay to use the investment we have in that AI. We're spending, millions and millions of dollars every year on that, and the return is so nominal. So that's a story that is across the market about, look at the level of money going across these investments, what they get up and talk about $100 billion for Stargate. That's a lot of money. And, what is the result? You need those things to sort of, and that excitement to push things forward. But the actual amount of return on most of that money is going to be pretty minuscule. And you just have to know when to, what you're learning and how you can be more practical about the application about it. And then, people will start to, to sort of walk away and look for the next shiny penny. And that's about the time when the usefulness of these technologies really become applicable.
You're so right. It's a great reminder to remember to differentiate between hype, reality. We often forget that. Mike, thank you so much. This was a really and very interesting and insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing all your experiences and perspective. Not often that we get to hear from someone who's been on both sides of client-vendor relationships. So that was really great.
I appreciate the invite.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BizTech Forward. Be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast to stay updated. Join us next time, presented by DataArt.